one teacher that had a real impact on me was actually a grade school teacher in New Berlin, a woman named Jane Van Deusen. She was my 6th grade teacher, and I can still remember Miss Van Deusen calling my parents in, because I was a pretty good student, but deportment was another area, and I was constantly in trouble. And she brought my parents in one morning and sat me down. I can still remember, she looked me right in the eye and she said, "Dan, you have more leadership potential than anybody I know, and you lead in many good ways, but," she said, "you're wasting so much time with some of the bad ways you lead and influence others." And that had a big influence in changing me. Now, fast forward 27 years, my son is in 6th grade, and guess who his 6th grade teacher is? Mrs. Van Deusen. And I thought, great, this is just terrific, until a couple months into the school year, I get a call from Miss Van Deusen. She wants to see me and Danny 7 a.m. because she's having some problems with Dan. We go in and sit down in front of her desk, and she had the principal in the room again, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I had to tell myself, "You're the parent now, relax." And she basically said along the same lines, the same thing to him, and it really, again, had a big influence on Dan as well. And I, thanked her profusely after that, and I made a point of stopping in a couple subsequent years as well. Another teacher was Senior Neighbor. I think it was Richard Neighbors. He was actually from Colombia, and he was one of our Spanish teachers. And I took Spanish from Senior Neighbor, and probably the biggest lesson, besides being able to become very fluent in Spanish, was his ability to think outside the box, because we had, I believe, the first language lab in the state at that time. And prior to that, I know at Waukesha I had taken some Spanish, and it was basically some reading with a lot of conjugating and looking at sentence structure, that type of thing. And his was, that's important, and we'll do some of that, and we certainly did, but the real emphasis should be on the speaking. And so he had the language lab. He even brought in popular music. La Bamba was hit song in those days, and he went out of his way to get a copy of it and bring it in so that he could, and we had to translate it and go right down the line. We even sang it. It was kind of cute at the time, I thought, but this guy really knows his stuff. I get to West Point, and they were doing the same thing. They were in the process of shifting away from the writing and the conjugating to the speaking, and it stood me in good stead. I went right into the advanced Spanish course. I didn't even take the basic course freshman year, and so I was in with a lot of the sophomores right off the bat. It also got me a couple of real opportunities when I was at West Point. They had the equivalent of West Point from Spain. The cadets visit West Point. I was given a week off from academics to take them around the East Coast and to wine and dine them with a group of officers because of my fluency in Spanish. And then they did the same thing to me the next year when the Mexican West Point cadets came to the academy. And then later, after I graduated, I was in the advanced course at Fort Belvoir, Virginia for engineers. The heir apparent to the chief of staff from Colombia was a student in the class he was learning in the United States, and they asked me if I would be his sponsor, and so I spent every day with Major Casalimas, and again, I felt like, wow, none of this would have happened if it weren't for the way Senior Neighbors started the class and his emphasis in driving through, so very important. Another name I remember was Miss Lynn Isley. She was my English teacher, and it was interesting because she was a toughie. Up to that point, because of my interest in the military and Civil War and West Point, I'd been able to get away with a lot of book reports and a lot of writing reports that I wrote on those topics. And the minute she found that out, she called me in and said, no more. This entire year, you're not going to be able to do anything military related. You're going to go with the classics, and even if I gave the rest the flexibility to go to like something with the military theme. You're going to do some classics because you got to become much more well-rounded, almost kind of Renaissance man type approach. And at the time, I kind of bristled at it, but in subsequent years, I've really reflected back because that had helped me many times because she taught me to go into an area that was not my comfort zone. And I found, especially in the Army and then later in the private sector, a lot of times I was thrust into that, sometimes unknowingly, but because she had insisted, I was very well prepared for it. I knew that I had to not only have a very strong academic background to achieve the appointment to West Point, which is made by a congressman or a senator, but I also had to be very well-rounded in sports. I had to have a lot of extracurricular activity and especially leadership potential. And I was just elated when I received my appointment. And again, there's no doubt that several key teachers as well as faculty and the entire process and experience of my high school was a large part in that process. I have had probably over the years a dozen different students of mine when I was teaching military history. A couple of them I didn't even know recognized or remembered me, that they just went through the motions, came back and either wrote me just little notes of thanks or said, I'm applying for this position and I can't think of anybody that I'd rather have write my letter of recommendation and explain what I'm all about than you. And it just, really touched me. So it's often thankless and it's often in the short term, why do I have to put up with this? I want to just throw up my hands. There's got to be an easier way to make a living, but believe me, you're making an influence, and many times on the least person that you'd expect it. And part of it too that I enjoy now is I go around the area and I talk about the Civil War, all different aspects of the war, and I've had a lot of that come back to me. Sometimes even students have come back and said, I really appreciate the way you approach it, and it gave new perspective on the Civil War and some of the things, some of the leaders that had been done. I'll share one that I was at Orchard Lane. This goes back quite a while ago, and a little guy, I was talking about the first Battle of Bull Run, and a little guy in the back of the room kept raising his hand and talking to me about Stonewall Jackson, and we had a little dialogue right during the class, and it worked in well. It wasn't disruptive at all. And after the class, I complimented the teacher on how some of her students took an interest, and I identified this young man. She had tears in her eyes, and she said, this is the first time he has spoken class in 6 months. Somehow you touched him, and again, to me, that's what teaching is all about. And there's just little doubt in my mind that anybody'd be hard-pressed to get a better quality education than in the New Berlin school systems. And that went 50 years ago, and it applies today.